Your life experience, good or bad, is a gift when you share it with others. At Taxi Chronicles, we allow real riders with real stories to share their gift. So hopefully this episode will intrigue, enhance or inspire you. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Morning. Yes, we're back with another episode, another rider. Today we have a lovely lady called Sally. And we're just talking about our experiences of being a minority growing up in school, what it's like, and how things change as we get older and we get dropped in with our own cultural background. So nice to have you here today, Sally.
Hi everyone listening. Hope you're all doing well. Happy Sunday.
Okay, so Sally, you was talking about how when you went to school wasn't the best experience, but your father had chosen to live in an area where you were a minority.
Yeah.
I don't really like that term, or let's say you're not the majority.
Yeah.
And how was that for you?
It was quite a difficult, experience, growing up, not necessarily having, other black people to relate to. There was obviously the culture shock, and it definitely had a toll, I guess you could say, on my identity at the time. But I found that, because for me, I was in, predominantly white educational schools, whatever you can call it, for majority of my life until I went to university. And that was the first time that, I didn't feel like the minority anymore. It actually was what you could say with the majority. So that was a massive culture shock for me. But now, when I look back as an adult, someone that's now graduated university, I see as, even though it was difficult, it was also a positive thing for me, because I felt like I was able to, amongst, my, I guess you could say, and amongst other black people, I was given the choice to decide what blackness really was. Because, coming from a, background where people always said to me, oh, you're not black enough. For me, growing up in, predominantly white schools, I was always told, you're too black to be friends with us. Your blackness is too much. Like, you need to almost dilute yourself in order to, fit in with us. Then when I met black people, it was like, oh, you talk like a white girl, you sound like a white girl, you're not a proper black person. So dealing with all those kind of, I guess you could say, stereotypes, or what we now call microaggressions, which is what they are, it was really hard for me to almost feel like I belonged anywhere. So because of what I experienced, I was able to decide, what, I'm the only person who gets to decide what blackness is. And at the end of the day, my experiences growing up, in predominantly white areas are still part of my experience. It doesn't mean that I am a white woman or I behave like a white woman, but it's part of my experience. So, when I met black people and I was around them, I was able to express myself and say, do you know what? I am still a black woman. I may not relate to the same, I don't know. I think the thing is that, as a community, we really don't like stereotypes. But I think sometimes, we do, I guess you could say, reinforce them sometimes. Some things that we call blackness, which are sometimes negatives, are sometimes the things that we reinforce. So, for me, I was always told, okay, you act like a white girl, you're like this, because I didn't necessarily reinforce particular stereotypes that were associated with blackness. But I was given the opportunity to kind of decide, okay.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah.
Are those differences cultural or racial? Because those are two different things.
I think they were more racial.
Why I ask you that
is
because if you look at a white person, you get white Eastern European, Italian, Greeks, all these different people who've come to live here. And now, correct me if I'm wrong, you're talking growing up in the 90s.
Yeah,
90s,
late
right?
90s, yeah.
Late 90s,
yeah.
Okay. So, you get all these people, but they all have different cultures. And they assimilate, not just because of the colour, but into a culture. But they also have they may bring other things into that assimilation.
Yeah.
Do you understand?
Yeah.
So that's why I ask you, is it really race or culture?
Yeah.
The only difference for us as black people, we can be more pointed out, and depending on your culture, very strong with our culture.
Yeah.
So that may be there. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, 100%. And this is the thing. I think it's funny because I'd say when it came to my culture overseas, you know, someone that's Jamaican, that was never really questioned by people. It more came down to, you know, my racial identity, or whether or not people class me as someone who was black enough. And then you have to ask yourself the question, well, then what is black? Because there are different types of black people. But again, I think a lot of the time, our identity, or what we consider as blackness, was actually decided for us. It's not something that we necessarily decided for ourselves. And so for me, you know, with the way that I grew up, not saying that this is the only reason that I was able to choose, because I think everybody has the right to choose, but I was forced to make a decision, because it was either I allow myself to constantly have my identity, you know, decided for me, or I decide myself. You know, and that's the only reason I'm able to kind of be confident or content with the way I am, because I've decided that blackness isn't not being well spoken. You know, a lot of people associate being well spoken with whiteness, but that has nothing to do with race. You know, stupid things like that. And, you know, I decided that, you know what, the way that I grew up, the things that I experienced never took blackness away from me. My blackness isn't something that was given to me, so therefore it's something that people can't take away from me. And maybe, you know, I may be a shock to some people, because maybe the types of black people that they grew up with is not necessarily what I am, but it doesn't mean that I'm any less. And I think given the way that I've grown up, I was forced to make that decision, because it was either I choose and I accept, or I just allow for the rest of my life people to decide where I fit in and where I can be comfortable, you know?
Can I ask you something? What was your outcome of your decision then? What was your decision you made?
My decision that I made was that I'm black regardless, and that no one can decide that for me. Because a lot, you know, as I was saying, you know, a lot of what people were deciding was blackness was literally just stereotypes. And it's, you know, and it was so marginalized, it was so small to a point that it didn't even cover all black people. You know, just to be specific, things like, you know, you're not necessarily someone that's confrontational. That has nothing to do with being a black person. That's a personality trait. That's something that, you know, you either are or you're not.
Because Essex girls, Essex people were confrontational. Bethnal Green,
yeah,
people were confrontational. They're the same like Essex, but they just migrated north-east to East London in that respect.
Yeah.
But yeah, I see what you're saying. I think what people seem to forget is obviously that the Africans had come here later than us. I think the direct Africans. And if you notice, apart from the ones who are born here, the ones who are come over, they try to speak the best English possible.
Yes.
And by certain people's terms, you could say that they say they're not black. It is not being black. But I wouldn't say that. I just say they're just an educated person. Or they choose to speak in a certain manner.
Yes.
Do you understand?
Yes.
And that's one thing I kind of really thank you that we've had this wave of other black cultures coming over, because we were very stigmatized considering we're suffering from 400 years of same slavery still. And now people can see what we would be like if we didn't have all that trauma. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
But identity is something that I think many people struggle with. But I always look at my father, my birth father. He was, if you hear him on the phone, he's a builder. He had his own building firm. You'd think he's a white man. But then obviously, depending on who he's talking to, you hear the raw Jamaican come on.
Yeah.
If he's talking to the kids, he's kind of talking, not heavy Jamaican, but quite thing, with the accent.
Yeah.
You understand?
Yeah.
So it's horses for courses. And you learn to be a chameleon because you need to be able to blend in with whatever environment's around.
Yeah.
So in essence, people can only judge you in how you speak to them, not how you speak to other people, because they won't necessarily see how you speak to other people.
Yeah.
And stuff.
Exactly.
How have you found the choice that you have made now?
great. I mean, it's given me closure, I guess, because, you know, as you said, identity is something that we all struggle with, especially within the, Black community. And it's helped me a lot, because when I've met, white people, when I've met Black people, I haven't necessarily felt like I've had to, and in the context, I mean, in terms of friendships, or even within the workplace. Obviously, you may have your work voice or whatever, but I don't feel like I necessarily have to change myself or be something I'm not in order to be accepted. I kind of have decided or accepted who I'm going to be and accepted who I am, and I'm that, and I think by doing that, it gives people, it also can educate people as well, that not every Black person is the same, because sometimes there can be that pressure, because due to, identity crisis, to sometimes, find comfortability in the stereotypes, because we think that's what Blackness is,
There's a big part of this is ignorance.
Yes.
Because if anybody believes one culture is all the same, everybody has cultural trends.
Yeah.
When it comes to intellect, understanding, or temperament, if you believe one culture is all the same, it's a high element of ignorance.
Yeah.
Because you may get certain cultures more fiery, stereotypically. Yeah, I'm a big believer in stereotypes, but it doesn't mean that everybody's that.
Yes.
So what I have to ask you is that your father's obviously decided you're going to live in the countries, or the rural areas of London, with,
Yes.
With predominantly other cultures, other races. Would you do the same if you was bringing up children? She's thinking that.
Do you know what? It's difficult to answer, because I think if and when I do have children, for me, it would be a question of, is this somewhere where, I don't know, I feel like there'd be more factors. It'd be things like, okay, what are the schools in the area like? What kind of feel does this place bring? I think I wouldn't necessarily go in mind saying, when I have kids, we have to grow up in a predominantly Black area, because I have seen the benefits of both. I've met people that have, I've met people that haven't, and as you know, there are pros and cons to both. But I think it's hard for me to say at this point in my life. But I think it's definitely something I would definitely consider or think about. It's not something I know when I have children, or when we're looking for someone to live, it's not something that I would just say it doesn't matter. I think it does matter, but at this point in time, it's hard for me to say. Yeah, I wouldn't be able to make a decision now. But you know what? I think if I did decide that we were to grow up in a predominantly white area, I think I would definitely do more effort in terms of keeping an eye on my children and having the right conversations. Not exposing them to too much too early, but making sure that we're having, the right conversations, because there's a lot that I've experienced growing up that my parents, I guess, were oblivious to at the time. Even racism within friendships, stuff like that. It's a lot of things that I guess my parents necessarily were probably just unaware of at the time. What it's like to be the only Black girl in the friendship group. How do you navigate that?
Do you have siblings?
I do, yeah. I have 2 younger siblings and I have an older brother. So even for me, these are the kind of conversations that I've had with them, that have helped them on their journey. But even though obviously we grew up in the same house, they've gone to completely different schools to me, so their experience has been slightly different. They've had a lot more, Black friends, Black people in their schools, whereas me at the time, I was probably like...
Well, your brother's the oldest one?
Yeah, brother's older, and funny enough, his school again he had a lot more Black people than I did. So I guess you could say I suffered the most, I guess.
Why would they send you?
Yeah,
that's a strange one, that you send the siblings to different schools.
But
especially if you've got an older boy. Obviously, I'm not condemning what your father's decisions he's made.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, if you're blessed with a boy child first, you send him to make sure he protects the younger ones.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that what happened was that the school that my brother went to, I didn't actually want to go to because it didn't have the best reputation. And because of where we lived, the school that I wanted to go to, I couldn't get into because of the catchment area. Me and my brother are 3 years apart. So primary school, we were in the same primary school, nursery, the same nursery. But when it came to secondary school, I actually didn't want to be in the same school as him. And then obviously my little sisters I'm 6 years older than them. So I think for them, they didn't want to go to my school because my school kind of went a bit downhill after I left. And it just so happened that by the time they were in secondary school, a lot more black people were living in the area.
Was your school a working class area? Was there a lot of working class parents, kids?
It was mixed, but I'd say majority of the kids were probably more middle class than working class.
Okay.
Yeah, but it was mixed, but I'd say, yeah, majority was still middle class, yeah.
It's interesting because as a male, I was in a school that's predominantly white, in primary school. But the fact that I could beat anybody probably stopped the I only had one person who was racist one time when I can remember. And he wasn't racist anymore after that. And if he started in secondary school was a mix, so it's an interesting experience and stuff. What does the future hold for you?
Wow, what does the future hold for me? In terms of what? In terms of life? I mean, hopefully, I get to fulfill my passions in my career, so acting, directing. I'm also heavily involved in my church, so, I'd love to see, more opportunities for the young people to grow and, I guess, eventually get married, have my own family. That's hopefully what will happen for me, I guess.
And with your acting, just a quick opportunity for you to pump your channel. Have you got an Instagram or something where you do your acting on?
At the moment, I don't have a platform that I share acting content, but maybe sometime in the future that's something that I could
next
do.
Time you get in a taxi, you will have one. Apart from that, we wish you well.
Thank you.
And we thank you for sharing your experience.
Oh, thank you for having me.
We hope you liked that Taxi Chronicles interview. Don't forget to share and subscribe to get the latest episode. Ever considered investing in the continent with the fastest growing economies and population on Earth? The same continent that holds 30% of the world's known natural resources. Listen to our sister podcast, Africa Investor Stories, where you hear real investors with real stories from around the world share their experience of investing in Africa. We post Monday and Thursday at 10 a.m. British Standard Time.